I often hear conversations had with people who are thinking about moving from one country to another. And most of the conversation revolves around how they will set their affairs up in the country that they're going to. But far less often do we spend much time talking about the arrangements in the country that we've moved from in respect to our financial situation, how we're going to manage financial affairs in the country that we've moved from. I recently saw a video of somebody here, he's in his 40s, he'd moved from Australia, and within a few weeks he proudly announced that he'd closed all of his bank accounts back there and he was running around free and easy. Well, it all sounds good in theory, but just consider it for a moment. That guy's in his 40s, so he spent years working in Australia in this case. So he would have some superannuation piled up. He may have some inheritance proceeds coming to him in who knows when. Whatever it is back in that country, you will need at some stage to do some sort of financial transaction processes. And if you don't have bank accounts in those countries that you've come from, well, how are you going to do that? And I'm sure it depends on the country in question, but I'm talking specifically in this case about Australia. If you move from Australia and you close all your bank accounts, well, you won't be able to get things like superannuation paid to you in a bank account outside of the country. So what are you going to do? We saw that employed very effectively a few years ago when people didn't go along with the party line. Unfortunately, it's not just a relic of the past. In places like Australia, people are being quietly debanked for absolutely no reason sometimes. The amount of people that's happening to, well, you can only kind of guess because, of course, the two crime families, the government and the banks, have got together and decided that there's no need for any reporting of the numbers or the reasons why they're debanking people. But one thing's for sure is that the banks have the right to just arbitrarily close people's account without reason. And so you can very well find yourself in a situation where you've set your financial arrangements up in the country that you moved from, feeling confident about the situation, only to have some bank just arbitrarily close your financial facility in that country that you've moved from. Now what do you do? It's also something to think about in respect to how you set yourself up in the country you've moved to. My personal philosophy is that we've moved to Paraguay. So if you imagine the line that we've crossed, which is from the country that we moved from into this new country, and it's a sort of demarcation point that I need to really keep in mind when it comes to what we have on this side of the line. So we have a house, a roof over our head, we have no debts here, but at least we can house ourselves, we've got water, we'll be able to grow food soon. And, you know, other things like income in this country, all things that we're been actively thinking about and working on and moving towards, you know, further establishing. But often people will come to a country and they will rent maybe an apartment in the city and feel confident because they've got their financial arrangements in the country that they've moved from or elsewhere. Each to their own, and that's why I say everyone's got their own personal perspective on how to set themselves up. My personal feeling is if I can't lay my hands on it, I don't really have control over it. And these days, even if you've got the ability to put your hands on it, well, there's still potential risk associated with whatever you're talking about when it comes to an asset class. But at least it's closer than being somewhere offshore and in a situation where you're having to rely on a government or a bank to allow you to have the privilege to continue to have access to that asset. People are being debanked in Australia. I know for sure. I haven't looked in other countries very much, but I have no doubt that their wonderful partners around the world will be doing likewise for no reason and no protection for the account holder just because the bank feels like it. And as I've said previously, the good old partner in crime, the government, well, they'll make sure that there's no protections in place for the account holder either. It's just the way that these crime families operate. There are some things that you can put in place. There's some arrangements and things that we have in place that I think mitigate this situation, but they're our personal private arrangements. And I think that when it comes to talking about things like finance and banking, well, they're not things that should be openly discussed in a YouTube video, at least in detail. And if they are, well, I think you really need to take them with a fair degree of caution because, you know, it's YouTube. So you've got to, you know, be, I guess, a bit more discerning than just taking concrete advice from some talking head that says that they've got the plan for you. Whether it's a Plan B passport or 10 passports, all those sort of promises, slow travelling. I listen to all those different videos and I think, oh, if it works for them, fine, but what happens if some Poindexter somewhere in an offshore bank decides to mess with their financial arrangements in a way that makes it difficult or impossible for them to maintain that lifestyle in the country that they've set up in? How does that work for them? And hopefully it works fine, but it is something that at least needs to be very carefully considered because the days of us taking anything for granted, particularly as it relates to our rights as consumers in the financial sector, they're gone because any rights that may have been written into the process seem to have pretty much evaporated, at least in places like Australia. The consumer, when it really comes down to it, is at the mercy of the banks. Best we can do is just be aware and make our arrangements accordingly. One recommendation I would offer is just have a range of options, open up a number of accounts, have a Wise or Revolut or Remitly, whatever those other forms of moving around money you can put in place. Definitely with things like Wise and so forth, just be careful in respect to not thinking that you can just park up huge sums into some facilities because they're in some cases not designed to do that. And it's a very dangerous option to take, to park up huge sums of money in facilities that aren't as secure as some others. But the more you think about it, the more you realise it's just an absolute labyrinth that they've created. And it seems intentionally so. And we can only surmise what the future holds. But in the meantime, you do what you can do. You know, keep it as real as possible, maybe as simple as possible. I think that there's no substitute for investing in relationships and practical skills. So if that way is cut off, you can go that way. If they don't let you do that, well, you can do something else. I think the more alternate arrangements we can have in place that are outside of their ability to thwart them, the better. We live in interesting times. Take care. Ciao. Smoking room.